Okay, so as with the previous videos, we've been looking at some advanced concepts of different fields of photography, and this video we will be focusing on food photography. So food photography is an artistic technique employed to exaggerate or enhance the appearance of food, often for advertising purposes. So it's not just about taking a photo of an item of food, it's about exaggerating certain aspects of that item of food. So if it's hot, really exaggerating the fact that there's steam coming off it and it's a really hot, warm dish. Or if it's really sweet, then there's really intense pinks and bright colors that are associated with being sweet. So it's about using different techniques to really exaggerate the typical psychological feeling that we might have towards a particular type of food. So good food photography is not just a pretty picture of something edible. It attempts to tell a story of that meal or paint a picture about it. So as I've just said, it's about using different techniques to really make the viewer feel like they are present at that table eating that meal, or about to bite into that piece of cake or whatever it might be that the photo is taken of. So in order to do that, the photographer will use props and will set up the scene and create an image not just around the food but around the entire scene itself, and that will help draw that viewer into that scene. So your ultimate goal as a food photographer is not just to take a pretty picture of your subject, but to create or tell a story about what that item of food is. So again, there are 6 concepts that we'll look at here. We're going to look at exposure and lighting, camera angle, scene design, color palettes and contrast, balance and white space, and movement and action. So first, with exposure and lighting, the most common way of lighting food photography is to have it brightly exposed and have a really large, bright, soft light source like this one here, where you can see everything is lit very well and the shadows are minimal, and they're also very soft. So it's about really getting as much light into that image as possible to minimize the amount of harsh shadows and dark bits that you have. Just have everything as bright as possible, and we do this by using a large light source that's close to the subject. So you might want to, for instance, grab your cake and instead of sitting in a dark room, take it right up next to the window, so that bright light source that's coming through the window can really light up your image like this. Another more professional way of lighting food photography is to use a low-key lighting technique like this one here, where essentially you are controlling the light source so that it only shines exactly where you want it to go. So here we've got like a darker scene, everything set up, like the props and everything that are being used is darker, and the light that's shining into the image is directed exactly onto this dish, so that the viewer's eye isn't distracted by everything else that's going on in the scene. They're drawn directly towards this bright, colourful part here. So the way that image has been lit is using a smaller, more directional light source. So obviously this has been created using professional studio lighting, but if you don't have access to that, you can always use like a torch or a phone light or something like that to create a directional light that'll go exactly where you want it to go. So lighting plays a big part in food photography because it's designed to draw the viewer's eye directly towards the most important part of the image, which would be the meal or the item of food that's being displayed. Camera angle is the next thing we'll talk about. So most commonly you'll see food photography taken from a bird's eye view. This is again to tell that story and to make the viewer feel like they are sitting at that dinner table looking down at that meal. And also because food, that's generally how we see food. We don't typically stand up and hold a plate like this and look at food from a side angle. So when we think of food, we think of how it looks from above. So it has that psychological effect of like relating to our own feelings and thoughts around a certain meal. So we can picture ourselves sitting at this dinner table about to eat this meal. Sometimes food doesn't look that great from above, like burgers or buns don't look that great from above because all you're going to see is just the seeds on top of a bun. So we do need to change the angle depending on what we're taking photos of. And some foods look better captured from side angles, like these three here. But you'll notice all three of them aren't a direct side, they're not directly captured from side onto the subject. They're still captured from somewhat above, looking down. So there's still a bit of a high angle taken on all three of these images. And that's again just to have that same effect of putting the viewer in that position where they're at least standing above that item of food and looking down on it. So we can draw those connections. So the camera angle helps contribute to that story we're trying to tell, of trying to put that viewer of the photograph in that position where they feel like they can actually imagine themselves looking at this item of food, and they start to, their mouth starts to water and they start to really imagine that this could be something that they're about to eat. So the third thing we will look at is scene design. So you'll commonly see with good food photography, you won't just see an item of food just taken a photo of. You'll always see that there's been a lot of effort going into designing the scene and what appears in the frame of that photograph. So, and quite typically what you'll see has relevance to what's being, what the photo is being taken of. So for instance, here we've got brownies, right? So instead of just having a brownie on a plate on a nice white background, the photographer has put, the original tray of brownies here and made it obvious that there's been like a portion that's been cut out and put on a plate, and there's been a bite that's been taken out of it. So it's telling that story about, you can imagine I've gone and I've grabbed myself a brownie, I've put it on a plate and I've had a bite of it. And the walnuts here, they relate because, the walnuts on top of the actual cake. So it makes it look like I'm here, I'm at home, my mum's just made this cake and I've just grabbed it and started eating it. And it's telling that story where you feel like you can actually imagine and start to feel those tastes and that psychological effect that it has. It's telling a story. Same with this one here. We see like the icing being put on top of the cookies. Has that same effect, like makes you feel like you're there present at the moment that they're coming out the oven and they're being iced, and it has that effect that it's telling the story. So yeah, and you can think about these other ones yourself. So the way the scene is designed is very carefully put together to help tell that story that the photographer is trying to tell. So what is included, to the side of the plate, what's included on the plate, what's included in, as an effect, like this one, how that scene is put together and what's included or discluded helps to tell that story that the photographer wants to tell. The next thing we're going to talk about is color tones and contrast. So color is one of the most important things of food photography, mainly because color has a strong psychological effect on us, and also we associate different foods and flavors with different colors and that sort of thing. So if we look, for instance, starting at this image, what you'll see is, and quite often what you'll see with food photography is, like a lot of different foods have a lot of different colors, and you have different plates that have different colors and different backgrounds and tabletops. So you start to see that there's so many different colors and it becomes too clashing to have all these random colors and things thrown into the image. So a food photographer will generally be really careful with the way they design their scene, and the colors that are used in that scene design, so that they can create a monotone effect, which limits the amount of distraction that's going on in the background, so that the viewer's attention goes directly to the food. So if you look at this example here, we've got a brown chopping board, brown background, brown table, brown utensils, brown on the bun, but then this really bright, colourful, the insides of the burger. So the viewer's eye goes directly towards that burger, and it's not distracted by whatever else is going on in the background. And same with this one here. We've got similar colour tones with the tablecloth, the the table itself, the bits of chocolate, the blueberries, and then just these tiny little specks of yellow here and there draws your eye towards the main part of the image, which is the meal itself. And same here, these color tones, these matching browns and grays and whatnot, and then you've got your bright green food, so your eye goes directly towards that spaghetti. And then same here with the berries, and the use of the little leaves of mint, I think it is, and how that green matches with this green here. So it's been very carefully designed so that this color balances this color, this color balances this color. This background isn't too distracting because they want you to see this. So it's about being not just throwing all this random stuff onto a plate and then throwing all this random stuff finding a random background and then seeing how it looks, because there's too much going on. So it's about being very careful with the different items of food that you use and the way that you design the scene to create the different colors that will draw your viewer's eye towards where you want it to go and tell that story that you want to tell. So the second to last one we're looking at is balance and white space. So when I talk about white space, I don't mean literal white space, I just mean blank space. Room for the eye to breathe. So this image here might look really busy, for instance, but the photographer has still been very careful to make sure that there's a lot of area and space around each item. See all this blue, this blank space around, all this extra space here, we call it white space. And that just gives the eye time to relax and breathe. So we can see this here, but our eyes sort of relax when we look at this outer limits, and then we look at this part, then there's room for our eyes to relax. So that's the principle of design, is making sure that there's plenty of white space, blank space, room for your eye to relax and not just filling the scene with everything that you want to put in there. Make sure you arrange things so there's still plenty of space. And you also need to arrange them in a way that creates balance. So it's all well and good to have a lot of blank space or white space, but it also has to create balance in the image. And if you look at this image here, quite notably the tablecloth or the kitchen cloth is helping to create that balance in this image. So if you imagine that wasn't there, you'd have quite a heavy image on this side. You'd have all these items here, but this tablecloth has just sort of been able to bring that balance back over to this side of the image, so it's not too heavy over here. So it's about positioning things in the frame to create that sense of balance. And this isn't a black and white thing. It's interpretive. So you take a photo and you look at it and you see, well, this image looks great, but there's a lot of space over here. It looks too blank. Maybe I need to come in and put another item here on this side of the frame to balance things out a bit. So it's a bit of trial and error with that. But overall, that's about making something that's visually appealing and natural to look at. And the last thing I'll talk about is movement or action. So not all food photography contains movement or action, but it is a clever technique and an effective technique when done properly, depending on the item of food that you're trying to advertise. So what do I mean by movement or action? I mean, essentially, instead of just having a still frame where all the items of food are just sitting there still, we have, as you can see here, like melting ice cream, like movement that's happening, that creates that action, like an action or a movement, something that's happening that you can almost visualize. Like if you were to say, for instance, turn on the video camera and look and watch this scene here, you could watch it for 10 minutes and it would still look the same because nothing's actually moving in the frame. Whereas here we've got things that are actually moving. So if you were to film it with a video camera, then obviously there would be a change. So that's the point of movement or action. So it's about creating a photograph that tells more of a story because of the movement and the action that's happening in it. So in this case, we've got like frozen melting ice cream. Another one is like pouring honey or maple syrup onto the pancakes. Here you've got the stretching up the noodles, or like dropping sugar or sprinkles onto sweets. So, and also like this one here, for instance, that's another way of creating movement. Here we've got movement with the steam. Yeah, so there are many different ways of creating this sort of effect, but it can be a very effective way of telling that story as well. Another technique that can be used to tell that story that you're trying to tell about the food. And this is another interesting thing I thought I'd throw in here, because again, it's with that movement. If you look at it here, like you've got, you know, a steaming prawn, but food photography isn't always about that, because sometimes you might take a prawn straight off the stove, but then you go to take the photograph, and by the time you actually take the photograph, the steam's gone, or it doesn't create that same amount of steam that you want it to create. So there are ways of being creative and clever, like using an iron or something to shoot the steam up. So food photography isn't always just about taking photos of food. It's also about being creative and clever in finding alternate ways to create sort of these effects that you want to create. That's a good example of that there. So those are the 6 key concepts of food photography, and I'll just run through them one last time. So we've got lighting and exposure. You want to basically have things as bright as possible, at the very least have the majority of the light source shining towards the main subject of the food. Camera angle will typically be above, directly above or somewhat above, so that it can put the viewer in the perspective of imagining how they would, where they would be if they were eating that food. Scene design, it's about creating a scene that tells a story and what is included in the frame and how that contributes to telling that story. The color tones, about balancing the different colors and the tones in a way that creates contrast and draws the viewer's eye, similarly to the light, to that main item of food. And then balance and white space, ensuring that there's enough balance around the image and enough white space to create something that's visually appealing. And finally, movement can be used depending on what food you're advertising. There might be ways to include movement in that image that could attract some extra interest. So many of these concepts are discussed in various ways in other videos that I've talked about in different areas of photography. So if you are interested in learning more about some of these concepts, watch some more of those videos. Otherwise, that is the 6 key concepts of food photography. Thank you.